Chapter 1. The Hidden Forces Shaping Our Lives. Have you ever looked at the chaotic events of your week or the shifting tides of the global news and felt an overwhelming sense that things are just happening to you? Most of us are taught from a very young age to view the world as a linear series of events. A rainstorm causes a flood. A competitor lowers their prices, causing a business to lose money. A disagreement causes a relationship to fracture. We are trained to look for a single, immediate cause for every effect. When something goes wrong, our instinct is to find out who or what is to blame, and then attempt to control or fix that external force. This is a very natural way to view life, and it has helped humanity survive and solve many straightforward problems. But it is profoundly inadequate for the truly complex, messy challenges we face in our personal lives, our communities, and our world. There is a different way to look at reality, a shift in perspective that changes absolutely everything. To understand it, imagine for a moment that you are holding an acoustic guitar. You reach out and firmly pluck the thickest string. The room immediately fills with a deep, resonant hum. Now, imagine you hold a piece of loose yarn suspended in the air, and you pull it back and release it with the exact same motion. Nothing happens. The yarn simply falls limp. The energy you applied was identical in both cases. The outside event was exactly the same, but the result was entirely different. Why? Because the response was not created by your finger. The response was waiting, latent and ready, inside the structure of the guitar string itself. Its tension, its material, its attachment points, its internal architecture determined exactly how it would behave when the world acted upon it. This is the core revelation we must embrace. The enduring problems in our lives and our societies, the chronic stress, the recurring economic slumps, the cycles of poverty or environmental degradation are not just random events inflicted upon us by bad luck or malicious outsiders. They are the natural characteristic behaviors of the structures we live within. When we stop obsessing over the hand that plucks the string and start examining the tension of the string itself, we are finally stepping into a space of true clarity and power. We are learning to see the hidden architecture of our reality. But what exactly is this architecture? At its most fundamental level, it is a system. A system is not just a random pile of things. Sand scattered across a driveway is just sand. If you sweep some away or add a little more, it remains nothing more than sand. But a system is an interconnected set of elements that is coherently organized in a way that achieves a specific function or purpose. Think about a vibrant, beloved local bakery that has been in your neighborhood for decades. If you were to walk inside and try to understand what makes it work, you might first notice the obvious elements. You see the massive ovens, the sacks of flour, the display cases, the bakers with flour on their aprons, the customers waiting in line. These are the physical pieces, but the elements alone do not make the bakery. You could deliver those exact same ovens and ingredients to a random group of people in an empty parking lot, and you would not have a bakery. What brings the elements to life are the interconnections. In the bakery, these are the recipes passed down through generations. They are the unspoken rhythms between the bakers who know exactly when to pull the sourdough from the heat. They are the flow of information, the bell ringing when a new batch is ready, the smiles exchanged between the cashier and a regular customer, the shift in production when the manager realizes a holiday weekend is approaching. Information and relationships are the invisible glue holding the entire enterprise together. Yet there is a third piece to this puzzle, and it is the most powerful and invisible of all: the purpose. The purpose of a system is rarely written on a wall. You have to watch how the system behaves over time to understand what it is truly designed to do. The neighborhood bakery's purpose might be to nourish the community, provide a creative livelihood for its staff, and make enough profit to keep the lights on. Because of this purpose, the bread is made with care and the customers linger to chat. Now, imagine that the elements and the interconnections remain exactly the same, but the purpose abruptly changes. Suppose the bakery is bought out, and the new sole purpose of the system becomes extracting the maximum possible financial profit in the shortest amount of time. Suddenly, the recipe is altered to use cheaper, artificial ingredients. The bakers are rushed, losing their rhythm and joy. The cashiers are told to stop chatting and move the line faster. The display cases are the same, the ovens are the same, the name on the door is the same, but the system has fundamentally transformed. It is no longer the same bakery. When we try to change our lives or our organizations, we usually obsess over the elements. We buy new equipment, we hire new staff, we change our wardrobe, we elect a new leader. But changing the players rarely changes the game. If you want to understand why a system behaves the way it does, look at the interconnections. And if you want to profoundly transform a system, look at its purpose. To navigate this interconnected world, we also need to understand how things move and accumulate over time. Everything around us and within us is a story of accumulation and flow. Imagine a vast, deep reservoir of water. The water level in that reservoir is a stock. It is the visible, measurable accumulation of the past. It changes only through its flows, the inflow of mountain streams and rainfall, and the outflow of evaporation and the river draining from the dam. We easily grasp this concept when it comes to physical things, but it governs the invisible forces of our lives just as strictly. Consider your own emotional resilience, your capacity to handle stress, your patience, your inner peace. This is a stock. It is a reservoir you carry within you. Every day, the demands of your job, the frustrations of traffic, and the anxieties of modern life act as outflows draining your reservoir. If you have no inflows, or if your inflows are weak, your stock of resilience drops dangerously low. You become brittle, irritable, and exhausted. To refill the reservoir, you must open the inflow valves. Deep rest, meaningful conversations with a friend, a walk in the quiet woods, a moment of genuine laughter. The profound thing about stocks, whether it is the balance of a bank account, the trust in a marriage, or the wood in a forest, is that they take time to change. You cannot instantly refill an empty reservoir, no matter how wide you open the valve. It takes time for the water to accumulate. This is why you cannot fix a burnt-out nervous system with one good night of sleep, and why you cannot rebuild shattered trust with a single apology. Stocks act as the memory of a system. They provide stability and momentum. They are the reason we must have patience with ourselves and our world when we are trying to create lasting change. We cannot expect instantaneous results in a reality governed by the slow, deliberate math of accumulation. Because stocks take time to fill and drain, systems require ways to monitor and adjust themselves. They do this through feedback loops, the elegant mechanisms by which a system regulates its own behavior. You experience a balancing feedback loop every time you drive a car down a winding road. You have a goal in your mind, staying in the center of the lane. As you drive, your eyes constantly monitor the distance between your car and the painted lines. When you see the car drifting slightly to the right, a signal goes to your brain. Your hands turn the steering wheel slightly to the left, and the car returns to the center. You are engaged in a continuous, subconscious dance of correction. Balancing loops are the guardians of stability. They are the mechanisms that heal a cut on your hand, keep a community together during a crisis, and bring an overheated argument back to a calm resolution. They are always seeking equilibrium, pulling the system back to its baseline whenever it is pushed off course. But there is another kind of loop, one that does not seek stability but acceleration. This is the reinforcing feedback loop. It is the engine of exponential growth or catastrophic collapse. A reinforcing loop enhances whatever direction of change is imposed upon it. Imagine a young, unknown musician playing a small gig at a local cafe. She plays with such raw, undeniable talent that 3 people in the audience are deeply moved. The next day, those 3 people tell 3 of their friends. At the next show, there are 12 people. The energy is higher, the performance is even better, and those 12 people tell their friends. Soon, the cafe is sold out. The larger the crowd, the larger the buzz, the larger the buzz, the larger the crowd. The system is feeding on its own momentum. This snowball effect can be a beautiful thing when it drives the growth of a healthy forest, the spread of a brilliant idea, or the compounding interest of a retirement account. But it is the exact same mechanical structure that drives a microphone's deafening feedback screech, an arms race between hostile nations, or a vicious cycle of addiction. Reinforcing loops are powerful, untamed beasts. Without a balancing loop to eventually constrain them, they will grow until they tear their environment apart. Seeing the world through this lens is a quiet revolution. When you begin to look past the dramatic daily events and instead trace the deep, rhythmic flows of the structures beneath, the world becomes less frightening and more comprehensible. You stop blaming individuals for systemic failures. You stop looking for quick fixes to deeply accumulated problems. You begin to realize that the universe is not a chaotic room full of disconnected objects colliding in the dark. It is a breathing, intricate web of stocks and flows, governed by the elegant, invisible hands of feedback loops. And as we will soon see, the way these loops push and pull against each other creates the very fabric of our daily struggles and triumphs. Chapter 2. The Push and Pull of Daily Life. There is a distinct, deeply human frustration that comes from feeling like you are running as fast as you can just to stay in the exact same place. You know the feeling. You spend your entire weekend cleaning and organizing your home, achieving a state of pristine, peaceful order by Sunday night. Yet, by Thursday evening, without any catastrophic event or deliberate sabotage, the mail is piled up on the counter, the laundry is spilling out of the basket, and the living room is a cluttered mess once again. You pour your energy into achieving a specific goal, you reach it, and then some invisible force immediately begins pulling you back toward chaos. This is not a personal failure, nor is it a sign that the universe is conspiring against you. What you are experiencing is the invisible tug-of-war that defines nearly every aspect of our existence. You are caught in the middle of competing systems, where different forces are relentlessly pulling a single aspect of your life in opposite directions. To master your reality, you must understand how these unseen forces interact, how they shift in power, and how they dictate the rhythms of your daily life. Imagine you have just moved into a beautifully restored, century-old farmhouse. It is the dead of winter, the kind of bone-chilling night where the frost creeps up the edges of the window panes. Your goal is simple. You want the living room to be a warm, comfortable sanctuary. So, you build a massive, roaring fire in the hearth. This is your first force, a balancing loop designed to drive the temperature of the room up to your desired goal. As the dry oak catches and the flames climb, you can feel the radiant heat pushing back the cold. You sit in your armchair, finally relaxing as the room reaches that perfect, cozy temperature. But a century-old farmhouse is rarely airtight. Beneath the floorboards, around the doorframes, and through the single-pane glass, the brutal winter night is actively pulling the heat away. This is your second force, a competing balancing loop. The outside air has its own goal. It wants the inside of your house to be exactly as freezing as the yard. Here is the profound dynamic at play. The warmer you make the room, the faster the heat tries to escape. The greater the difference between your cozy living room and the frozen yard, the more aggressively the winter air pulls at your walls. You are trying to fill a bucket that has a hole in the bottom, and the fuller the bucket gets, the heavier the water presses down, pushing the water out of the hole even faster. If you step away from the fire to make a cup of tea, you return to find the room already chilling. The fire is still burning, but the invisible drain of the cold is relentless. To win this battle, you cannot just occasionally throw a log on the fire and expect the room to stay warm. You have to continuously supply more heat than the house is losing. This is why we so often feel exhausted in our daily lives. We treat our bank accounts, our physical health, and our relationships like a fire we only need to light once. We make a grand gesture, we earn a big paycheck, we spend a weekend resting, and we think the job is done. But the world is full of drafts. Unexpected expenses drain our finances. Daily stresses drain our energy. Miscommunications drain our relationships. If you do not account for the continuous invisible drain on your resources, you will always find yourself inexplicably cold, wondering where all the warmth went. You must either consciously build a fire large enough to outpace the draft, or you must do the deep structural work of sealing the leaks. While some parts of our lives are a struggle to maintain balance, other parts are defined by the explosive trajectories of growth and decay. In these spaces, we are not just fighting the cold, we are riding the momentum of forces that feed on themselves. Think about the life cycle of a passionate creative endeavor. Imagine a woman named Sarah who opens a small independent bookstore in a quiet neighborhood. She curates the shelves with deep personal care, handwriting recommendations for her favorite novels. In the beginning, the store is quiet. But then a few avid readers discover the shop. They love the atmosphere so much that they tell their friends. The next week, those friends come in and buy books. Sarah uses that new revenue to host a local author for a reading. The event draws a larger crowd, generating more revenue and more excitement, which allows her to buy a better espresso machine for the corner cafe, which draws in the morning commuters who then buy more books. This is the thrill of a reinforcing loop. The more success the store has, the more success it is capable of generating. the growth does not just add up, it multiplies. It feels magical, like catching a wave that just keeps rising. This is the engine of all exponential growth in our world, from a booming economy to a viral video to the intoxicating rush of a new romance. When you are in the grip of a dominant reinforcing loop, it feels as though the sky is the limit. But we live in a physical, finite world, and no wave can rise forever. Lurking beneath every story of explosive growth is a balancing loop, waiting for its moment. For Sarah's bookstore, the physical space is finite. There are only so many shelves. More importantly, Sarah's energy is finite. As the crowds grow massive, she can no longer write personalized recommendations. She works 14-hour days, becoming exhausted and irritable. The lines at the espresso machine grow too long, and the quiet, intimate charm that initially drew people to the store begins to erode. This is the turning point, a phenomenon known as shifting dominance. For the first 2 years, the engine of growth was the unquestioned master of the system. But now, the forces of limitation have quietly grown strong enough to seize control. The exhaustion of the staff and the overcrowding of the space become the dominant forces. The experience of visiting the store declines. Customers stop coming back. The revenue drops, forcing Sarah to cut back on events, which further reduces the foot traffic. The very engine that drove the explosive rise has been thrown into reverse. The store does not just slow down, it begins to contract. Understanding shifting dominance is one of the most vital skills you can develop for navigating your life. We are often blind to it. We fall in love with the upward curve of the reinforcing loop, convinced that the good times will accelerate indefinitely. We push our careers, our bodies, and our relationships to the absolute limit, ignoring the quiet accumulation of fatigue, resentment, or resource depletion. We fail to realize that the balancing loops, the forces of decay, limitation, and mortality, are always present in the background, slowly gathering strength. The art of living well is not about forcing infinite growth. It is about recognizing which force is currently dominating your reality. Are you in a season of explosive growth where your task is to responsibly manage the momentum? Or are the balancing loops of exhaustion and limitation beginning to assert themselves? If you can recognize the shift in dominance before it crashes over you, you can adapt. You can hire help, expand your boundaries, or gracefully accept a plateau. Our lives are not a series of random events. They are the beautiful, complex outcomes of these competing forces. The fires we build and the drafts we fight, the explosive growth we nurture and the inevitable limits we encounter. These are the heartbeats of our existence. But as we navigate these pushes and pulls, we must confront a deeply frustrating reality. Sometimes, despite our best efforts and our clearest intentions, the results of our actions do not arrive when we need them to. We turn the steering wheel, but the car does not immediately respond. We reach out to catch the falling glass, but our hand arrives a fraction of a second too late. To truly master the forces shaping our lives, we must understand the treacherous, invisible gaps in time that govern our world. Chapter 3. Hitting the Wall, Limits and Delays. There is a deeply universal experience that perfectly captures the profound frustration of navigating a complex world. Imagine you are traveling and you step into the shower of an unfamiliar hotel room. You turn the handle to what you assume is a comfortable temperature and step under the water. It is freezing. Shivering, you quickly crank the dial all the way to the hot side. For a few seconds, nothing happens. The water remains ice cold. Assuming the shower is just weak, you push the dial even further. Suddenly, a wave of scalding water hits your skin. You jump back, panicked, and instantly yank the dial all the way back to cold. Again, for a few seconds, it remains boiling hot. And then, just as you step back in, the water turns to ice again. You find yourself dancing in and out of the water, trapped in a miserable cycle of freezing and burning, desperately fighting a plumbing system that seems to have a malicious mind of its own. But the system is not malicious. It simply contains a delay. There is a long pipe between the valve you are turning and the shower head where the water actually touches your skin. The information you are receiving, the temperature of the water, is old news. By the time you feel the cold and react by turning the dial, the hot water is already on its way. Because you do not see the immediate result of your action, you overcorrect. Your own frantic, impatient adjustments are creating the very temperature swings that are making you miserable. This hotel shower is a perfect microcosm of one of the most powerful and perilous forces in our lives, system delays. We live in a reality where cause and effect are rarely instantaneous. It takes time for an apology to heal a wounded relationship. It takes time for a change in your diet to reflect in your physical energy. It takes time for a new government policy to alter the economic landscape. Yet, we are creatures of immediate sensation. When we feel pain, we want relief now. When we make an effort, we want the reward today. This mismatch between our impatient expectations and the sluggish physical reality of the world causes us to make some of our most devastating mistakes. Consider the story of an entrepreneur, a woman who pours her life savings into building a company that manufactures custom bicycles. For the first 2 years, she struggles to find her footing. Then, one spring, a major lifestyle magazine features her bicycles. Suddenly, her inbox is flooded with orders. Her initial reaction is caution. She waits a few weeks to see if this is just a momentary spike or a genuine shift in demand. This is her perception delay. When the orders keep pouring in, she realizes she needs to ramp up production. She hires more welders, leases a larger warehouse, and places massive orders for aluminum tubing and gears. This takes time to organize. This is her response delay. Finally, the orders are placed, but the materials must be forged in a factory overseas and shipped across the ocean. This is the delivery delay. By the time the mountains of aluminum arrive and her new staff is fully trained, the crisp autumn air has set in. The summer biking season is over, and the sudden craze for her product has naturally cooled. She now has a massive warehouse full of expensive inventory, a high payroll, and very few new orders. Panicking as her cash reserves dwindle, she halts all future material orders and lays off half her staff. She braces for a long, quiet winter. But the following spring, her brand reputation pays off, and a steady, robust demand returns. Customers try to buy her bikes, but her warehouse is empty, her staff is gone, and her supply chain is shut down. She has completely missed the market. She is trapped in the exact same cycle as the person in the hotel shower, just on a scale of months rather than seconds. She is experiencing severe oscillations, swinging wildly between having far too much inventory and far too little. When we find ourselves in this kind of cyclical chaos, our instinct is almost always wrong. We think the solution is to react faster. The bicycle manufacturer vows to never be caught off guard again. She decides she will monitor daily sales trends and adjust her factory orders every 48 hours. She becomes hyper-vigilant. But reacting faster to a system that has long built-in physical delays is like turning the shower dial more frantically. It only makes the swings more violent. She will order materials at the slight bump of a sunny weekend and cancel them at the slight dip of a rainy week, whipping her supply chain into a frenzy of inefficiency. The brilliant, counterintuitive truth of dealing with delays is that when you cannot speed up the physical delivery of the system, you must actually slow down your own reactions. You must increase your response delay. If the bicycle maker averages her sales trends over a longer period, making smooth, gradual adjustments to her production rather than chasing every sudden peak and valley, the oscillations will eventually damp down. The system will find its equilibrium. Delays require us to cultivate foresight and patience. We must learn to act not on the panic of the present moment, but on the quiet, steady rhythm of the long-term trend. Delays test our emotional endurance, but there is another force that tests our very survival. While we are struggling to manage the pace of our world, we are also constantly pushing against its size. Every physical growing thing in this universe will eventually hit a wall. No matter how brilliant your strategy, no matter how endless your ambition, you live in a bounded environment. Understanding the nature of the walls you are running into is the difference between gracefully adapting to reality and destroying everything you have built. Imagine a booming, prosperous town built in the center of an arid desert. The town exists solely because decades ago someone drilled deep beneath the sand and discovered a massive ancient aquifer. This underground ocean of fossil water has been trapped in the rock for millennia. It is a non-renewable resource. There is no rain to refill it. Every drop drawn from the earth is gone forever. In the early days, the water is so close to the surface that it practically leaps from the wells. The town uses it to build lush golf courses, sprawling neighborhoods with green lawns and massive agricultural fields. Because the water is cheap and abundant, the town grows rapidly, expanding its population and its economy at a steady exponential rate. As the town grows, it needs more water, which fuels more growth, which requires even more water. For a long time, the limits of the aquifer are invisible. But underground, the water table is dropping. As the water gets deeper, it requires larger, more expensive pumps to bring it to the surface. The cost of maintaining the town begins to rise. The town leaders, driven by the desire to maintain their booming economy, do not slow down their growth. Instead, they invest their wealth into designing incredibly advanced, powerful drilling technology to chase the water deeper into the earth. Here is the terrifying mathematics of exponential growth against a non-renewable limit. It happens with blinding suddenness. If the town is doubling its water usage every 10 years, it does not matter if they suddenly discover a second aquifer just as large as the first. That massive, miraculous discovery will only buy them exactly one more decade of life. When you are growing exponentially, the vast majority of the resource is consumed in the very final stages of the curve. Because the town used brilliant technology to keep the water flowing at a high rate, they masked the signal of their impending doom. They built their civilization larger and larger, making their eventual fall infinitely more devastating. When the drill bits finally hit dry bedrock, the collapse is total. The lawns turn to dust, the economy shatters, and the desert reclaims the streets. The pursuit of maximum growth against a rigid, non-renewable limit guarantees a sudden and catastrophic crash. The faster and higher you climb, the farther you fall. When dealing with a finite constraint, the only true choice is whether you want to burn brightly and briefly or pace yourself to sustain your wealth for generations. But not all resources are trapped in stone. Many of the systems we rely on are alive. They possess the miraculous ability to heal, to breathe, and to reproduce. These are our renewable resources. Picture a coastal village that has survived for centuries by harvesting a specific, highly prized type of fish from the surrounding bay. The fish population is a living stock. It has its own engine of growth, reproducing and replenishing its numbers year after year. For generations, the villagers row their small wooden boats into the bay, catching enough to feed their families and trade with neighboring towns. Their harvest rate is perfectly balanced with the regeneration rate of the fish. They are living off the interest of the ecosystem, leaving the principle untouched. They could sustain this graceful balance until the end of time. But human ambition is a restless thing. A new generation comes of age, eager for greater wealth. They take out loans to buy massive diesel-powered trawlers equipped with advanced sonar. They can now sail further, stay out longer, and locate schools of fish with pinpoint accuracy. Their capital stock, the fleet of boats, grows exponentially, and so does their daily catch. Because the fish are a renewable resource, the environment tries to adapt. As the bay is thinned out, the remaining fish actually have more food and less competition, allowing them to reproduce at a slightly faster rate. The ecosystem stretches to accommodate the pressure. The village experiences a golden age of wealth and prosperity. However, a living resource can only stretch so far. Every biological system has a threshold, a critical breaking point. If the villagers push their fleet just slightly beyond the maximum regeneration rate of the bay, they will trigger a painful oscillation. The fish population drops too low to support the massive fleet. The villagers cannot pay the loans on their trawlers. Boats are docked, fishermen lose their livelihoods, and the village suffers a deep economic depression. But this depression is the very thing that saves the bay. With the boats idle, the fish are left in peace. Over the next decade, the waters slowly repopulate. Eventually, the village can begin to fish again, though they have learned the bitter cost of their overreach. But there is a darker third path. What if the villagers' technology is too good? What if their sonar is so precise and their nets so vast that even as the fish population plummets, they can still hunt down the very last schools? They use their advanced capital to completely overcome the natural warning signs of scarcity. They fish relentlessly until the breeding population is dragged below its critical threshold of survival. The fish can no longer find mates. The genetic diversity shatters. The species dies out entirely. In their blind pursuit of growth, the villagers have done the unthinkable. They have transformed a renewable resource into a non-renewable one. The boats rot in the harbor, and the bay is permanently empty. These are the unseen boundaries that shape our reality. The delays that test our patience and the limits that test our wisdom are not flaws in the design of the universe. They are the guardrails of existence. When we refuse to acknowledge them, we cause our own suffering. We exhaust ourselves fighting oscillations we created, and we destroy the very foundations that support our lives. But when we finally learn to respect the walls, When we learn to slow down our reactions, honor our constraints, and harvest only what can be replenished, we stop fighting the world. We begin, at last, to move in harmony with it. Chapter 4. The hidden brilliance of our world. We spend a tremendous amount of our lives noticing when things break down. We obsess over the flat tire, the failed business venture, the misunderstood conversation, and the sudden illness. This is a natural human survival mechanism. We are wired to detect threats and failures. But because we are so fixated on the cracks in the pavement, we rarely pause to marvel at the sheer miraculous fact that the pavement holds together at all. We are surrounded by and composed of systems that function with a breathtaking, invisible brilliance. When left to their own devices, healthy systems manage themselves, heal themselves, and evolve to meet the challenges of a constantly shifting universe. To truly understand our world, we must look beyond our frustrations and learn to recognize the three hallmarks of a highly functional system: its elasticity, its wild creativity, and its elegant architecture. The first of these hidden miracles is resilience. We often confuse resilience with rigid stability, but they are profoundly different. Stability is a marble pillar standing completely motionless, bearing a heavy load without yielding a single inch. It looks incredibly strong, but if a severe earthquake strikes, the marble cannot bend. It can only shatter. Resilience, on the other hand, is the ability to be stretched, pressed, and deformed by the world, and then somehow gather the strength to spring back into your original shape. It is the willow tree that bends entirely to the ground in a hurricane, only to right itself when the winds pass. Imagine a tight-knit coastal community that has just been struck by a devastating historic storm. The physical elements of their town are battered, houses are flooded, power lines are severed, and the roads are impassable. If this town were merely a collection of rigid structures, it would cease to exist. But a healthy community is a remarkably resilient system. Within hours, long before any official government aid can navigate the debris, the invisible feedback loops of human connection activate. Neighbors who previously only exchanged polite nods are now sharing generators and stockpiling uncontaminated water. Someone with a chainsaw clears the main artery. Someone with medical training sets up a triage center in the local school. This recovery is not driven by a single central command. It is the result of thousands of overlapping, redundant feedback loops all working toward the exact same goal: the restoration of the community. If one person is too exhausted to help, another steps in. If the primary road is blocked, they find a way through the woods. This is the essence of resilience. A truly resilient system does not just have one way of healing itself, it has backups for its backups. It has a deep, rich plateau of safety, allowing it to absorb massive shocks and still find its way back to equilibrium. Yet in our modern world, we frequently and dangerously sacrifice this resilience in the name of efficiency. Consider a modern, hyper-optimized corporate supply chain. To save money, a global manufacturer might eliminate all its backup warehouses and demand that raw materials arrive at the factory precisely on the day they are needed. On paper, this is beautiful. It is perfectly stable, incredibly productive, and highly profitable. But it has absolutely no resilience. If a single cargo ship gets stuck in a canal halfway across the world, the entire global production line grinds to a halt. We strip away our emergency reserves, our redundant safety nets, and our personal downtime because they seem like wasted resources. We optimize our lives until we are walking on a razor's edge, entirely unprepared for the inevitable moment when the wind blows, but merely bouncing back from disaster is only the baseline of what a brilliant system can do. The second characteristic of a healthy system is its capacity for self-organization. This is the almost magical ability of a system to learn, to diversify, and to build its own internal complexity out of nothing. Think about a group of neighbors who decide to transform an abandoned, trash-filled dirt lot into a community garden. There is no master architect. There is no rigid top-down blueprint dictating exactly where every seed must go. Instead, there are just a few simple organizing rules. The rules might be as basic as: we share the water, we do not use toxic pesticides, and we respect the plots claimed by others. From these deeply simple agreements, wild complexity blooms. One person realizes that planting marigolds keeps the beetles away from the tomatoes. Another figures out how to weave fallen branches into a beautiful, functional trellis. Someone else sets up a composting system that feeds nutrient-rich soil back to the entire grid. Over a few seasons, that barren lot evolves into a vibrant, highly complex ecosystem of plants, insects, and human relationships. It adapted to its specific environment, learning what grew best in the shade of the nearby buildings and what thrived in the harsh afternoon sun. No single human mind could have sat down and pre-designed the exact, intricate web of life that emerged. It had to organize itself. This capacity to evolve new structures and behaviors is the most powerful force in the universe. It is how a single fertilized cell differentiates into the staggering complexity of a human being. It is how human societies evolved from small nomadic tribes into global networks of communication and art. But self-organization requires a certain amount of freedom, a willingness to experiment, and intolerance for a little bit of messy disorder. Because it is unpredictable, it often terrifies those in positions of power. We constantly try to stamp out self-organization by imposing rigid bureaucratic rules, demanding that every student learn exactly the same way, or that every worker follow a mechanical script. In doing so, we kill the very creative force that could invent the solutions we so desperately need. As a system successfully self-organizes and grows more complex, it faces a new challenge: how to manage all this new, dizzying information without becoming overwhelmed. The brilliant solution to this problem is the third hallmark of a healthy system: hierarchy. When we hear the word hierarchy, we often think of a corporate ladder, a tool of oppression where the people at the top bark orders at the people at the bottom. But in nature, a hierarchy is a beautiful, deeply functional nesting of systems within systems. You are a living hierarchy. You are made of trillions of individual cells. If your brain had to consciously monitor the nutrient intake, waste removal, and temperature of every single one of those trillions of cells, you would instantly collapse from information overload. Instead, your body delegates. The cells organize themselves into organs: your liver, your heart, your lungs. The cells inside your liver communicate intensely with each other to manage the filtration of your blood, handling the local problems locally. They only send the most vital, summarized information up to the central nervous system. Because the subsystems are allowed to take care of themselves, the larger system can function smoothly, without the central command center needing to micromanage every detail. The true purpose of the upper layers of a hierarchy is not to dominate the lower layers, but to coordinate them, to protect them, and to help them do their jobs better. A hierarchy only breaks down when this sacred balance is forgotten. Sometimes the breakdown happens from the bottom up. A subsystem decides that its own individual goals are more important than the survival of the whole. If a single cell in your body forgets its place in the hierarchy, ignores the signals to stop growing, and decides to multiply wildly for its own selfish benefit, it becomes a cancer that ultimately destroys the entire body. When a subsystem optimizes its own success at the expense of the whole, the entire structure is threatened. Other times, the breakdown happens from the top down. A central authority becomes so obsessed with control that it strips away the autonomy of its subsystems. A government might pass laws so restrictive that local municipalities can no longer govern themselves according to their unique cultures. A micromanager might hover over an employee, dictating every keystroke, completely destroying the worker's ability to think creatively or solve problems on the ground. When the top crushes the bottom, the system loses its flexibility, its intelligence, and its soul. When we step back and view our world through this lens, we realize that we do not need to constantly force the universe into submission. The systems we live within, our bodies, our ecosystems, our communities, already possess a staggering genius. They know how to bounce back from trauma, how to invent brilliant new solutions, and how to organize themselves for the good of the whole. Our job is not to play puppeteer pulling every string. Our job is to nurture their resilience, give them the freedom to self-organize, and respect the beautiful, nested hierarchies that allow them to thrive. But if these systems are so inherently brilliant, why do they still manage to plunge us into chaos, frustration, and crisis? Why do we constantly find ourselves blindsided by the very structures we created? To answer that, we must turn our gaze inward and examine the profound flaws in how the human mind interprets reality. Chapter 5. Why we get surprised. We navigate our entire lives using a map that we carry inside our heads. Every time you make a decision, whether it is how to respond to a frustrated colleague or how to invest your life savings, you are consulting this internal map. You are relying on your beliefs about how cause and effect work, how people behave, and how the world is structured. These mental models are magnificent, sophisticated tools that have allowed humanity to build civilizations and survive unimaginable hardships. But we must accept a deeply humbling truth. Our mental models are not the actual world. They are simplifications, mere sketches of a reality that is infinitely more complex than our brains can fully process. And whenever there is a gap between our simplified map and the messy, breathing territory of the real world, we get surprised. One of the most profound flaws in our mental maps is our absolute addiction to events. We are wired to pay attention to the sudden, the loud, and the dramatic. We consume the daily news, which is nothing but a rapid-fire list of isolated happenings, a stock market plunge, a political scandal, a sudden storm. But viewing life as a series of disconnected events is like trying to understand an iceberg by only looking at the snow resting on its very tip. Imagine a couple, David and Eleanor, who have been married for 10 years. One Tuesday evening, David drops a water glass in the kitchen. It shatters across the tile. Eleanor walks in, sees the mess, and suddenly erupts in a furious, screaming rage. David yells back, and within minutes they are having the most catastrophic argument of their entire marriage. If you only look at the event, your mental model tells you that a dropped glass caused a marriage to fracture, but that is absurd. The event was merely the output of a system, the final drop of water that caused the bucket to overflow. If you look beneath the surface, you see the structure. For the past 8 months, David's company has been undergoing layoffs, and he has been bringing his silent, suffocating anxiety home every night. Eleanor has been taking on extra shifts to compensate, sacrificing her sleep and abandoning her morning runs that used to keep her grounded. Their stock of emotional resilience has been draining for nearly a year, while the pressures of their lives have steadily increased. The dropped glass was entirely irrelevant. It was just the trigger that released the tension accumulated by the structure of their lives.
If you want to heal their marriage, you cannot do it by buying shatterproof glasses. You must change the structure. You must look past the beguiling dramatic event and trace the long history of the underlying system. Our maps are also flawed because we stubbornly expect the world to behave in straight lines. We love linear relationships because they are easy to calculate. If I put in a little effort, I get a little reward. If I put in twice the effort, I get twice the reward. But the universe rarely operates in straight lines. It is a wildly non-linear place, full of curves, thresholds, and breaking points, where the act of playing the game actually changes the rules of the game. Consider Maya, an amateur runner who decides to train for her first marathon. In her first month, the linear math works perfectly. She runs 3 miles a week and her endurance improves. She runs 10 miles a week and she gets proportionally faster. Her mental model is cemented. More miles equal more speed. Desperate to qualify for a prestigious race, she decides to apply this linear logic to the extreme. She stops taking rest days and suddenly doubles her weekly mileage to 60 miles. She expects her speed to double. Instead, halfway through a Tuesday morning run, she feels a sharp, blinding pain in her shin. It is a severe stress fracture. Not only did she fail to get twice as fast, she is now incapable of running a single mile. Her linear mind was utterly blindsided by a non-linear reality. Up to a certain point, the stress of running caused her bones to adapt and grow stronger. But once she crossed an invisible threshold, that exact same stress began to destroy her bone tissue. In a non-linear world, doing more of a good thing does not always yield more good results. Sometimes it destroys the foundation entirely. We also set ourselves up for surprise by drawing neat imaginary borders around our problems. We like to pretend that systems have clean edges. Imagine a prosperous, growing city situated along a beautiful river. The city council decides they want pristine, immaculate streets to attract more tourism. They pass a law sweeping all the industrial waste and daily garbage into barges which simply dump it 20 miles downstream. They draw a mental boundary around their city limits, look at their clean streets, and declare the problem solved.
But the real world is a continuous, unbroken web. Nature does not respect the invisible lines drawn on a municipal map. The toxic waste drifts downstream, poisoning the spawning grounds of the fish that the city's own fishing fleet relies on. The fish population collapses, the fishermen lose their jobs, and the local economy plunges into a recession. The city is shocked. They thought they threw their problem away. But in a deeply interconnected universe, there is no such place as away. Everything comes from somewhere, and everything goes somewhere. When we draw our boundaries too narrowly, we are always violently surprised when the consequences of our actions circle back and knock on our front door. Even when we broaden our boundaries, we often fail to respect the layered limits of the physical world. Every growing business, every passionate project, and every human body is surrounded by a multitude of constraints. We are constantly hitting walls. Imagine an ambitious farmer who inherits a patch of exhausted land. She wants to grow a record-breaking crop of corn. She realizes the field is shaded, so she clears the surrounding brush to give the plants maximum sunlight. But the corn barely grows. She tests the soil and realizes it is bone dry. She spends thousands of dollars installing a state-of-the-art irrigation system. The corn grows a few more inches, then turns yellow and halts. Frustrated, she brings in an agronomist who tells her the soil is entirely depleted of nitrogen. The farmer is discovering the law of the minimum. It does not matter how brilliantly you solve one problem if another vital ingredient is missing. You can drown a plant in water, but if it lacks nitrogen, it will die. And the most fascinating part of this dynamic is that growth itself changes the rules. The moment the farmer adds nitrogen, the corn will explode toward the sky, growing beautifully until it suddenly hits the next limit. Perhaps the plants crowd each other out and compete for space. The secret to sustainable success is not forcing blind growth, but staying vigilant, constantly asking yourself, what is the next limiting factor that my very own growth is about to trigger? Perhaps the most tragic and misunderstood reason we are surprised by our world is the phenomenon of bounded rationality. We look at traffic jams, market crashes, or environmental destruction, and we wonder why humans are so incredibly foolish. Why do we collectively create outcomes that literally no one wants? It is not because we are stupid or evil or irrational. It is because every single person is making the most logical, reasonable decision possible based on the limited, delayed, and imperfect information they can see from their specific vantage point. Imagine you are driving home during rush hour on a massive 4-lane highway. Traffic is crawling. You are exhausted and just want to see your family. Suddenly, you notice the lane to your right has opened up and is moving smoothly. From your driver's seat, looking through your windshield, the most rational, intelligent thing you can possibly do is merge into that faster lane. So you put on your blinker and shift over. But you are not omniscient. You cannot see the miles of highway behind you. You do not realize that 50 other drivers, operating with the exact same limited information and the exact same rational desire to get home, saw the exact same gap. They all merge at the same moment. Instantly, your new lane grinds to a dead, suffocating halt, and the lane you just abandoned becomes wide open. You acted perfectly rationally, and in doing so, you helped create a miserable gridlock. This is the invisible trap of bounded rationality. We do not know what everyone else is planning to do until they do it. We only see our immediate surroundings. We cannot fully grasp the long-term impacts of our actions on the whole system. If you took a brilliant, enlightened philosopher and strapped them into the driver's seat of that car, they would make the exact same lane change. When we finally understand this, a profound shift occurs. We stop judging people. We stop assuming that if we just fire the CEO or divorce the spouse or elect a new politician, the problems will magically disappear. We realize that replacing the players does not change the game if the new players are handed the exact same flawed map and the exact same limited view through the windshield. If we want to stop being surprised, and if we want to stop creating misery, we have to stop blaming the individuals. We have to bravely step back, look at the whole system, and figure out how to redesign the information they are receiving. And, as we are about to discover, when systems are designed poorly, they do not just surprise us, they trap us. Chapter 6. The Traps That Hold Us Back. We have explored the beautiful, hidden brilliance of the world around us, and we have confronted the blind spots in our own minds that cause us to be violently surprised by reality. But there is a darker, more stubborn side to the systems we live within. Sometimes the structures in our lives do not just surprise us, they actively ensnare us. They behave in deeply perverse ways, generating continuous, exhausting frustration despite our absolute best efforts to fix them. These are not random strings of bad luck, they are systemic traps, incredibly common structural archetypes that produce the exact same painful patterns in businesses, in governments, in ecosystems, and in our own living rooms. Understanding these traps is the only way to stop walking blindly into them. Consider the trap of the endless standoff. Imagine a passionate, newly promoted director taking over a struggling creative department. His goal is to elevate the quality of the work, so he immediately implements a new policy. He requires daily progress reports, institutes strict deadlines, and demands that all creative decisions be routed through his office. He is applying a firm, deliberate fix to a lagging system. But the employees, who have always valued their creative autonomy, feel suffocated. Their goal is to maintain their independence and professional dignity. So they quietly resist. They fill out the daily reports with vague language. They follow the exact letter of the new rules, but withhold their finest, most innovative ideas. The director looks at the results and sees that the passion has drained from the room. Because his initial fix did not work, his instinct is to push even harder. He tightens the deadlines and institutes mandatory brainstorming sessions. The employees, feeling even more micromanaged, dig their heels in deeper, retreating into total apathy. This is a trap known as policy resistance, or fixes that fail. It happens when multiple actors within a system are pulling a single stock toward entirely different, conflicting goals. Everyone is acting rationally from their own bounded perspective, expending massive amounts of energy to get what they want. But because they are pulling in opposite directions, the system becomes locked in a paralyzing tension. The harder one side pulls, the more fiercely the other side resists. It is a ratchet effect where every intervention only escalates the standoff, leaving the system stuck in a miserable baseline that absolutely no one wants. When you find yourself trapped in policy resistance, whether in a boardroom or in a bitter argument with a spouse, your natural instinct is to try and overpower the other side. But overpowering requires relentless, exhausting force, and the moment you let go, the system will violently snap back. The true way out of this trap is deeply counterintuitive, and it requires immense courage. You have to let go. You have to stop pulling. You must take all the energy you are wasting on resistance and use it to step back, sit down with the other actors, and search for a larger, overarching goal that unites you both. When the director realizes that both he and his team ultimately want to create work they are fiercely proud of, they can stop pulling against each other and redesign a system that supports that shared vision. While some traps are born from conflict, others are born from a tragedy of shared abundance. Imagine a breathtaking, pristine meadow at the edge of a growing town. It is a shared public space open to everyone. One Saturday, a family decides to host a large picnic there. They enjoy the sunshine and the soft grass. When they leave behind a few empty bottles and trample a small patch of wildflowers. The family reasons that the meadow is massive and their tiny mess will not really matter. The following weekend, a local sports club decides the meadow is the perfect place for a massive tournament. They tear up the turf with their cleats and leave overflowing trash cans. The next month, an outdoor concert is held there. Every single person using the meadow is receiving a massive, immediate individual benefit from being in that beautiful space. But the cost of their actions, the trampled grass, the noise, the garbage, is not borne by them alone. The cost is diluted and shared by the entire town. Because the individual reward is so high and the personal consequence is so delayed and dispersed, no one has any rational incentive to limit their own behavior. Everyone looks around and thinks, if I do not use this space, someone else will, so I might as well enjoy it. And so, the grass turns to mud, the trash piles into mountains, and the pristine meadow is entirely destroyed. This is the tragedy of the commons. It is a devastating trap that occurs whenever a shared, erodible resource lacks a strong, immediate feedback link to the people using it. We see this exact same structure destroying our shared oceans, our global atmosphere, and the quiet sanity of our shared digital spaces. To escape this trap, we cannot simply rely on education or appeals to human morality. Good intentions are rarely strong enough to overcome the blinding math of personal gain. We have to restore the missing feedback loop. We must design rules, permits, boundaries, and penalties, a system of mutual coercion, mutually agreed upon, that forces every individual to feel the true cost of their actions and protects the shared resource from our own unchecked desires. There is a third trap, one that does not announce itself with a bitter standoff or a destroyed meadow, but creeps in so quietly that you rarely notice you are caught in it until years have passed. Think of a long, deeply cherished friendship. In the beginning, you and your friend spoke every week, sharing profound hopes and vulnerabilities. The standard of your connection was incredibly high. But then, life became demanding. A month passed without a phone call. When you finally connected, the conversation was rushed and superficial. You felt a pang of disappointment, but your mind quickly rationalized it. You told yourself that you are both just busy adults now, and this is simply how life goes. You allowed your perception of that single poor interaction to lower your standard for the entire friendship. The next time, it took 3 months to call, and because your expectations had already slipped, the 3-month gap felt acceptable. Fast forward a few years and you are essentially strangers who exchange polite text messages on holidays. This is the trap of the drift to low performance, also known as eroding goals. It is the famous syndrome of the boiled frog, where the water temperature rises so gradually that the frog never realizes it is being cooked. The downward spiral is driven by a tragic flaw in our psychology. We tend to believe bad news more than good news, and we let our perceived reality dictate our desired reality. When our performance slips, instead of fighting fiercely to return to our original goal, we excuse the failure and make the lower performance our new baseline. Whether it is the slow degradation of a romantic relationship, the creeping acceptance of poor customer service in a business, or the gradual abandonment of a personal health routine, the structure is exactly the same. We excuse our worst moments, and the system drifts endlessly downward. To break out of this insidious trap, you must do something radical. You must refuse to let your standards slip. You must keep your goals absolute, no matter how terribly the current reality falls short. Better yet, you can reverse the trap entirely by anchoring your expectations not to your worst failures, but to your absolute best performances. If you use your brightest moments as the unyielding benchmark for what is possible, the exact same mechanical structure will pull your life into a relentless drift toward excellence. These traps, the paralyzing standoff, the plundered commons, the slow fade of our highest standards, are not curses inflicted upon us by a cruel universe. They are simply structural architectures, and because they are structures, they can be redesigned. We have the power to step out of the tension, to protect our shared treasures, and to hold the line on our deepest values. But before we can learn exactly where to push to change the world, we must confront 2 more traps that are perhaps the most dangerous of all because they are driven by the intoxicating, runaway momentum of our own desires. Chapter 7. Escalation and Addiction. There is a particular kind of exhaustion that comes not from standing still, but from running a race that has no finish line. You look around and realize that the faster you run, the faster everyone else is running just to keep up with you. The stakes keep rising, the pace keeps accelerating, and the original reason you started running has been completely forgotten in the blinding, panicked need to simply not fall behind. We are now entering the territory of systems that are driven by runaway momentum, where our own competitive instincts and our desperate desire for quick relief lock us into cycles of profound destruction. Imagine 2 small, family-owned restaurants sitting directly across from each other on a quiet, tree-lined avenue. For years they coexisted peacefully, each serving their own loyal customers. But one spring, the owner of the first restaurant decides he wants to attract a little more foot traffic. He installs a bright, tasteful neon sign in his front window. It works. He sees a slight bump in evening reservations. The owner of the second restaurant across the street looks out his window, notices his dining room is slightly emptier than usual, and feels a surge of anxiety. To win back his crowd, he installs a massive, flashing electronic billboard that illuminates the entire block. The first owner, suddenly cast in the shadow of his rival's blinding marquee, feels his blood pressure rise. He retaliates by hiring a loud, energetic street band to play brass music on the sidewalk right outside his doors. The second owner, refusing to be outdone, places giant industrial speakers on his roof and blasts competing music into the night sky. Within a month, the once peaceful avenue has been transformed into a deafening, neon-lit carnival of sensory warfare. Both owners are spending a fortune on electricity and musicians, entirely draining their profit margins. Their original, loyal customers have abandoned the neighborhood completely because it is too loud to enjoy a meal. Yet, neither owner can stop. If one turns off his music or unplugs his sign, the other will instantly monopolize whatever foot traffic remains. They are locked in a death spiral of competition. This is the trap of escalation. It is driven by a vicious, reinforcing feedback loop built on a very simple, terrifying rule. I will take whatever you do, and I will raise you one. Escalation happens whenever one actor takes their desired goal not from an absolute standard, but from the perceived state of their competitor. It is the exact same systemic structure that drives an arms race between hostile nations, a vicious smear campaign between rival politicians, or a bitter price war between global corporations. Escalation is exponential, meaning it builds on itself and flies to extremes faster than the human mind can easily comprehend. When you are caught in this trap, every action you take to protect yourself actually fuels the fire, guaranteeing that your opponent will strike back harder tomorrow. If it is allowed to run its course unchecked, escalation only ends one way, with the complete exhaustion, bankruptcy, or collapse of one or both of the competitors. Escaping this trap requires an act of profound, almost unthinkable courage. You have to unilaterally disarm. You have to be the restaurant owner who walks outside, unplugs the neon sign, dismisses the band, and accepts a temporary loss in order to break the cycle of madness. The only other graceful way out is to sit down with your bitter rival and negotiate a new set of rules, a disarmament agreement, that places strict, balancing limits on the competition so that both of you can survive. But what happens when a competition does not end in a negotiated peace and one competitor actually wins? In the real world, the end of a competition is rarely the end of the story. It is usually just the setup for the next, far more unequal round. Think about two brilliant, fiercely dedicated young musicians entering a prestigious conservatory. They are entirely equal in talent and work ethic. At the end of their first semester, there is a concerto competition. The judges deliberate for hours and finally award the first prize to one of the students by a razor-thin margin. The winner is given a small cash prize and, more importantly, is invited to perform a solo with the local symphony. Because she performs with the symphony, she catches the attention of a master teacher who offers her private, advanced lessons. Because she has this master teacher, her technique skyrockets, and the following year, she easily wins the competition again. This time, the prize is a national tour. Meanwhile, the student who lost the first competition by a fraction of a point received no cash, no solo, and no master teacher. To afford his tuition, he takes a part-time job waiting tables. He has less time to practice, less elite guidance, and less public exposure. By the time they graduate, the gap between these two originally equal musicians is an unbridgeable chasm. One is a global touring soloist. The other is struggling to find a seat in a regional orchestra. This is the system trap known as success to the successful, or competitive exclusion. It occurs whenever the winner of a competition is rewarded with the exact resources they need to win even more easily in the future. It is a reinforcing loop of advantage. We see this everywhere. Wealthy individuals use their capital to invest in assets that generate more wealth, while those living paycheck to paycheck have nothing left over to invest, falling further behind the rising cost of living. The rich get richer, and the poor get poorer. Not necessarily because of malicious intent, but because the structure of the system automatically multiplies early advantages and penalizes early disadvantages. If a system of success to the successful is left entirely to its own devices, it will run until one player owns the entire board and everyone else is bankrupt. To prevent a society or an economy from tearing itself apart through extreme inequality, we must build in deliberate mechanisms that level the playing field. We have to create structures that break the loop, whether that is funding universal, high-quality public education so every child has a fair start, or designing tax systems that prevent the endless accumulation of dynastic wealth. A healthy society understands that a game where only one person is allowed to win will eventually be abandoned or destroyed by the losers. Escalation and the accumulation of advantage are traps driven by our relationship with others, but the most insidious trap of all is the one we set for ourselves. It happens when we are in pain, when our systems are failing, and we reach out for a lifeline that ultimately becomes our hangman's noose. Imagine a loving father who is watching his young son struggle profoundly with his mathematics homework. Night after night, the boy sits at the kitchen table in tears, staring at fractions he cannot comprehend. The father's goal is to alleviate his son's pain and protect his academic confidence. So, one evening the father sits down and simply does the hardest problems for him. The boy goes to school the next day, hands in the perfect assignment, and receives glowing praise from his teacher. The pain is gone. The crisis is averted, but a dark, invisible shift has occurred in the structure of their lives. The boy did not learn how to do fractions. The fundamental problem, his lack of mathematical understanding, was not solved. The symptom was merely disguised. The following week, the homework introduces decimals, which require a foundational knowledge of fractions. The boy is even more lost. The tears return, the frustration is deeper, and the father, feeling the escalating pressure, steps in and does the entire assignment. Over the course of a year, the boy's own internal capacity to struggle through a difficult problem completely atrophies. He becomes terrified of frustration. The father is now trapped, spending 2 hours every night doing middle school math, realizing with a sinking dread that his son is utterly dependent on him. This is the trap of shifting the burden to the intervener, more commonly known as addiction. The structure of addiction extends far beyond chemical dependencies on nicotine or alcohol. It happens whenever a system is struggling to maintain itself, and an external intervener steps in with a quick, symptom-relieving fix. Because the symptom is relieved, the system feels better, and no one does the hard, agonizing work of solving the root cause. The system's original capacity to heal or manage itself withers away from lack of use. Soon, the system requires more of the intervention just to survive. We see this tragic architecture everywhere. A modern agricultural farm strips the nutrients from its soil through overfarming. Instead of doing the slow restorative work of crop rotation and soil healing, the farmer applies chemical fertilizers. The crop yields look fantastic for a season, but the soil's natural microbial life dies off entirely. The next year, the farmer must apply twice as much fertilizer just to get the same result, becoming permanently addicted to the chemical intervention. A stressed executive relies on a double espresso to push through a massive presentation, masking her exhaustion without actually giving her body the deep rest it requires to function. Soon, her natural energy reserves are decimated, and she needs 4 espressos just to get out of bed. Addictive policies are incredibly seductive because they are so simple, so fast, and so easy to justify in the heat of a crisis. But they are fatal to the long-term health of any system. Breaking an addiction requires moving through the fire. It requires the profound pain of withdrawal. The father must sit at the table and watch his son cry in frustration without picking up the pencil. The farmer must endure a few seasons of meager, heartbreaking harvests while the soil slowly recovers its natural biology. You must confront the deteriorated, broken state of the system that the intervention was hiding, and you must painstakingly rebuild your own internal capacity to carry the load. The best way out of the addiction trap is, of course, never to enter it. We must cultivate a deep suspicion of any solution that promises immediate relief without demanding fundamental change. If you are the one stepping in to help, your intervention must be designed to strengthen the system's own ability to stand on its 2 feet, and then you must gracefully, firmly remove yourself. These traps of momentum, the escalating wars we cannot quit, the advantages that crush the marginalized, the quick fixes that hollow out our souls, are the architects of our deepest systemic suffering. But suffering is not our only legacy. Because we are human, we are also incredibly clever, mischievous, and creative. And as we will explore next, our desire to navigate and outsmart the structures around us leads to its own fascinating and sometimes disastrous consequences. Chapter 8. The Rules of the Game. Human beings are wonderfully, endlessly creative creatures, but perhaps never more so than when we are told exactly what we are not allowed to do. There is a mischievous spark in the human spirit that looks at a strict boundary and immediately begins searching for the hidden door. We love to navigate the spaces between the lines, outsmarting the constraints placed upon us. In many ways, this is a beautiful survival trait, the engine of human innovation. But when this instinct collides with the rigid structures of our organizations and societies, it creates a fascinating and deeply destructive trap. Imagine a sprawling, highly competitive software company that is desperate to increase its annual profits. The executives sit in a boardroom and decide they need a massive surge in sales. They hand down a rigid, non-negotiable rule to their hundreds of sales representatives. Every single person must close 15 new contracts a month, or they will be immediately terminated. The executives believe they have designed a perfect, forceful system to drive the company toward unprecedented financial success. Down on the sales floor, the representatives are panicked. Closing 15 legitimate large-scale software deals in a single month is practically impossible. But these are clever, resourceful people, and they want to keep their jobs. So they analyze the exact wording of the new mandate. They realize the rule dictates the number of contracts they must sign, but it says absolutely nothing about the financial value, the duration, or the quality of those contracts. The sales team quietly goes to work. Instead of spending weeks negotiating massive, highly profitable partnerships with major corporations, they start calling tiny, local businesses. They offer them stripped-down, practically free versions of the software on month-to-month contracts. They even take their existing, loyal clients and split their large, comprehensive accounts into 3 or 4 separate, tiny contracts just to multiply the paperwork. At the end of the month, the executive dashboard is glowing green. The arrestingly high number of closed contracts is celebrated. The executives congratulate themselves on a brilliant management strategy. But 3 months later, the company is bleeding money. The revenue from these tiny contracts does not even cover the cost of processing the paperwork. The customer support division is completely overwhelmed by thousands of unvetted, confused new users who are constantly canceling their micro-subscriptions. The company appears to be thriving on paper, but in reality the system has been utterly distorted. This is the system trap known as rule beating. It occurs whenever people take evasive action to get around the true intent of a rule, abiding flawlessly by the letter of the law while completely destroying its spirit. We see this everywhere in our world. It happens when government departments waste millions of dollars on useless supplies in the final week of the year, simply because if they do not drain their budget, they will be allocated less money the following year. It happens when environmental protections are enacted and landowners quietly destroy the habitats on their property before the inspectors arrive. Rule beating is almost always the desperate response of the lower levels of a hierarchy when they are crushed by rigid, unworkable, or poorly defined rules handed down from above. The natural but entirely incorrect response of the people in power is to try and stamp out this behavior by making the rules even harsher or the punishments even more severe. But harsher rules only breed more creative evasion, twisting the system into even more unnatural, agonizing contortions. The only way out of this trap is to treat rule beating not as a rebellion to be crushed, but as a loud, flashing signal that your rule is fundamentally flawed. You must redesign the constraints to release that brilliant human creativity toward actually achieving the true purpose of the system, rather than wasting it on beating the system. However, there is another trap that is the exact opposite of rule beating, and it is arguably much more terrifying. In rule beating, the system is actively trying to evade your intent. But what happens when the system obediently, flawlessly produces exactly what you ask for, only for you to realize that what you asked for is not what you actually wanted? Consider a city that has been struggling with a rising wave of violent crime. The citizens are frightened, and the mayor is desperate to restore a sense of peace and security to the streets. The mayor calls in the chief of police and declares that they need to measure and track the safety of the city. They decide that the best indicator of a proactive, effective police force is the number of arrests made each week. The goal is set: maximize the arrest rate. The police officers, wanting to serve their city and succeed in their careers, follow the rule to the letter. But catching a violent criminal requires weeks of painstaking, dangerous detective work. It is slow and difficult. If an officer's entire job evaluation is based purely on the volume of arrests, they are going to optimize for volume. The officers hit the streets and begin arresting citizens for the most minor, trivial infractions imaginable. They arrest teenagers for loitering in the park. They arrest people for jaywalking, for expired vehicle registrations, for arguing loudly on the sidewalk. The city's arrest numbers skyrocket. The mayor holds a press conference, pointing to the charts, proudly declaring that the police force is working harder than ever before. But the city is not any safer. The violent criminals are still operating, entirely ignored by a police force too busy processing paperwork for jaywalkers. The community's trust in the law is utterly shattered. The courts are choked with trivial cases, and the citizens feel harassed and deeply divided. The system produced exactly what it was told to produce, but it did not produce peace. This is the devastating trap of seeking the wrong goal. It happens when we define our indicators of success inaccurately or incompletely, confusing the measurement of effort with the measurement of the actual result. Systems, like a magical genie granting a wish, have a terrifying tendency to give us exactly what we ask for. If you measure the success of an education system purely by how much money is spent per student, the system will brilliantly figure out how to spend money, but it will not necessarily produce educated children. If you measure the success of a national economy purely by the gross national product, tracking the total volume of money changing hands, the system will produce an endless, frantic churn of production and consumption, but it will not guarantee the health, happiness, or moral integrity of the people living within it. How we measure success defines the reality we live in. We cannot expect a system to produce justice, equity, or lasting joy if we do not deliberately define our goals to reflect those profound values and then rigorously measure our progress toward them. When we look closely at our lives, we find that we are constantly navigating these two poles of deception. We are either exhausting ourselves searching for the hidden loopholes to beat the rules that constrain us, or we are running ourselves into the ground blindly pursuing metrics of success that leave us feeling empty and unsafe. We spend our lives playing a game where the rules are either broken or fundamentally wrong. But we are not powerless prisoners of these architectures. If we have the courage to stop playing the game, we can step back and become the architects. We can find the hidden levers of power that actually move the world, and we can begin the profound work of designing a reality that finally aligns with our deepest truths.
Chapter 9. Finding the Levers of Power. There is a profound, almost mythological appeal to the idea of the leverage point. We hear echoes of it in our legends and our daily lives. The silver bullet, the magic password, the secret passage, the solitary hero who effortlessly turns the tide of a massive battle. A leverage point is a place of tremendous power within a complex system, a specific location where a remarkably small shift in one thing can produce a massive, fundamental change in everything else. We all yearn to find these points. When we are trapped in a failing business, a stagnant relationship, or a fractured society, we are desperate to find that one lever we can pull to make the pain stop and the healing begin. The fascinating truth is that people who are deeply immersed in a system usually know exactly where the leverage points are. They have an intuitive, bone-deep understanding of what drives the structure, but there is a tragic twist. Because complex systems are so deeply counterintuitive, we almost always push the lever in the exact wrong direction. We identify the source of the power, but our bounded, linear minds convince us to manipulate it in a way that systematically worsens the very problem we are trying to solve. To truly change our world, we must learn to identify the levers of power and, crucially, we must learn which way to push them. We have to understand that not all interventions are created equal. There is a hierarchy of power within every system, and we waste the vast majority of our lives exhausting ourselves at the very bottom of this hierarchy. At the lowest level of power, we find the numbers, the constants, and the parameters. Think of the dials and faucets of a bathtub. In our society, parameters are the tax rates, the minimum wage, the exact amount of a budget cut, or the speed limit on a highway. We spend perhaps 99% of our political and personal energy fiercely debating these numbers. We go to war over them. Imagine a family that is drowning in credit card debt. The parents sit down at the kitchen table late at night exhausted and terrified and decide to cut their grocery budget by 10%. They spend hours clipping coupons and arguing over the price of milk. They are adjusting a parameter. But adjusting the price of groceries will not save a family that is structurally addicted to using credit cards to fund a lifestyle they cannot afford. No matter how much they adjust the dials, if the plumbing of the system remains exactly the same, the water will continue to drain away. Changing parameters rarely changes the fundamental behavior of a system. A stagnant economy does not magically stabilize because of a 1% shift in an interest rate, and a polluted river does not become pristine simply because the acceptable toxin levels were adjusted by a fraction of a millimeter. If we want to create real change, we have to move higher up the ladder of power. We have to look at the physical architecture and the buffers of the system. A buffer is a stabilizing stock, a reserve designed to absorb shocks. If a city is prone to catastrophic floods, a massive reservoir acts as a buffer. The physical layout of a system, the actual concrete intersections of roads, pipes, and supply chains, dictates how easily life can flow through it. If you live in a city with terrible traffic, the local government might try to solve the problem by changing a parameter. They lower the speed limit. The traffic remains. So, they look at the physical structure.
They realize that 5 major highways all merge into a single narrow bridge. That is a structural bottleneck. But physical structure is incredibly difficult and expensive to change. You cannot simply unbuild a bridge overnight. The demographic bulge of a generation aging into retirement is a physical structure that cannot be legislated away. Once a physical architecture is locked in place, it becomes a slow, heavy constraint. To find true, agile leverage, we must move past the physical world and enter the invisible realm of information and control. We must look at the delays and the feedback loops. As we explored earlier, a delay in a system is a powerful driver of chaos and oscillation. If an economy takes 5 years to build a new power plant, but electricity demand changes month to month, the system will constantly swing between having too much power and too little. Changing the length of a delay is a massive leverage point, but we often push it in the wrong direction. We assume that faster is always better. We build high-frequency trading algorithms that execute stock trades in microseconds, removing all the natural delays that allow a market to breathe and stabilize. By stripping away the delays, we ask the system to react so fast that it becomes hypersensitive, twitchy, and prone to catastrophic crashes. The true leverage often lies in slowing a system down, introducing deliberate pauses so that our actions can catch up with our wisdom. Higher still on the ladder of power are the feedback loops themselves. Every healthy system relies on balancing loops to self-correct. Your body sweats to cool down. A democracy relies on a free press to expose corruption. When a system is failing, it is often because these self-correcting mechanisms have been stripped away in the name of short-term profit or convenience. We destroy the natural wetlands that absorb storm surges, and then we are shocked when the hurricane destroys the coastline. A profound leverage point is to relentlessly protect, restore, and strengthen the balancing feedback loops that allow a system to heal itself. But even more powerful than strengthening a balancing loop is weakening a reinforcing loop. When a system is locked in runaway exponential growth, whether it is a cancer cell, an escalating arms race, or an economic bubble, our instinct is usually to build a massive balancing force to smash into it and stop it. We try to build a bigger wall to hold back the flood. But the leverage point is not hitting the brakes harder. It is taking your foot off the accelerator. If you can reduce the gain of the reinforcing loop, if you can slow down the rate at which the winner takes all, the system will naturally, gracefully return to a sustainable balance. And yet, there is a level of power that sits even above the feedback loops. It is the invisible architecture that dictates how those loops function in the first place. It is the structure of information flows. Imagine a sprawling modern office building. For years, the property manager has been fighting a losing battle against astronomical electricity bills. Employees routinely leave their computers running, space heaters blasting, and overhead lights burning throughout the night. The manager tries adjusting parameters. He sends out memos begging people to conserve energy, and he threatens to fine departments that overspend. Nothing changes. The employees ignore the memos because the cost of the electricity is entirely invisible to them. They receive all the immediate comfort of the energy, but the financial pain is hidden away in an accounting office on another floor. The manager decides to stop fighting the parameters and instead alters the flow of information. He installs a large, elegant digital display directly inside the main lobby elevator bank, where every single employee must stand and wait each morning and evening. The display simply shows the real-time, minute-by-minute energy cost of each specific floor in the building. It ranks them from most efficient to most wasteful. He does not change a single rule. He does not issue a single threat. But overnight, the behavior of the entire organization transforms. Employees on the most wasteful floors feel a sudden pang of social embarrassment when they see their floor highlighted in red on the lobby board. A quiet, spontaneous culture of accountability emerges. The last person to leave a room starts instinctively flipping the light switch. The electricity bills plummet. This is the staggering power of an information flow. Missing feedback is one of the most common causes of system malfunction. When we act blindly, without seeing the immediate consequences of our choices, we naturally act selfishly and destructively. By simply taking information that already exists and delivering it to a new place, making the invisible visible, making the delayed immediate, we can radically alter the behavior of a system without ever passing a new law or spending a single dollar. When you understand the hierarchy of leverage,
You stop wasting your life arguing over the minutiae of the parameters. You stop trying to forcefully rebuild the physical plumbing of a reality that resists you. You step back and you look at the invisible wiring. You look at who has the information, what the goals truly are, and how the rules are designed. You become an architect of reality, capable of creating profound shifts with a gentle, perfectly placed hand. And once you master the mechanics of these systems, you are finally ready to do the most important work of all, learning how to actually live gracefully within them. Chapter 10. Dancing with the Future. We have spent our time together pulling back the curtain on the invisible architecture of our reality. We have looked at the relentless push and pull of feedback loops, the hidden delays that test our patience, and the profound, sometimes devastating traps that can capture our communities and our lives. After seeing all of this mechanical structure, you might be tempted to believe that if you just study hard enough, if you just gather enough data and map out every single stock and flow, you can finally seize total control of your world. You might think that complete mastery is simply a matter of finding the right lever and pushing it with enough force. But to believe that is to fall into the oldest and most dangerous human trap of all. We must accept a beautiful and humbling truth. Our knowledge of the world instructs us, first and foremost, that the world is vastly greater than our knowledge of it. Every idea, every statistic, and every brilliant strategy we hold in our heads is nothing more than a model. These mental models are incredibly useful, but they fall entirely short of representing the messy, infinite, breathing complexity of the real world. The universe is a profoundly non-linear place. It is full of shifting boundaries, unpredictable human rationalities, and wild, self-organizing creativity. You cannot command a complex system any more than you can command the weather. Imagine a master sailor setting out across the open ocean. A novice on that same ship might grip the wheel with white knuckles, terrified of the wind, trying to force the massive vessel through sheer willpower to move in a straight line. The novice is exhausted, constantly fighting the waves, experiencing every sudden gust of wind as a personal attack. But the master sailor knows they cannot control the ocean. They do not fight the wind, they listen to it. They feel the tension in the rigging and watch the accumulation of the dark clouds on the horizon. They understand the long, heavy delays between turning the rudder and the ship actually shifting its course. They know exactly how much stress the hull can take before it loses its resilience. The master sailor does not command the sea. They dance with it. This is the ultimate paradigm shift we must make. We have to stop acting like mechanics trying to fix a broken, linear machine and start acting like dancers in a massive, interconnected ecosystem. To do this, we must first learn to simply watch the rhythm of the system before we blindly intervene. When we encounter a problem, our instinct is to instantly react to the panic of today's isolated events. But we must learn to step back and look at the history of how the system has behaved over time. We have to listen to the beat of the music before we step onto the floor. By watching the long-term behavior of a relationship, an economy, or a natural environment, we begin to sense the hidden structures and the delayed feedback loops that are actually driving the dance. Next, we must hold our own beliefs loosely. Because our mental maps are always imperfect, we will inevitably be surprised by the world. When a system behaves in a way we did not predict, we must not grow angry or defensive. We must treat that surprise as a profound gift. It is the universe gently tapping us on the shoulder, revealing a flaw in our understanding. We must be fiercely willing to redraw our mental maps, to let go of our egos, and to admit our own profound ignorance. The most dangerous people in any system are those who are absolutely certain they know exactly how everything works. The most powerful people are those who remain permanent, curious learners, constantly exposing their own assumptions to the light of day. As we learn the steps of this dance, we must also expand the boundaries of what we care about. Because everything is connected, there is no such thing as throwing a problem away. We cannot simply optimize our own small department, our own family, or our own nation at the expense of everyone else. When we draw our boundaries too narrowly, the consequences of our selfishness always circle back to destroy us. We have to look for the overarching goals that unite all the actors in the system. We must widen our circle of compassion until we are no longer fighting for a single piece of the system, but working for the vibrant, long-term health of the entire web. Finally, we must learn to celebrate the wild, unpredictable brilliance of the world.
We must stop trying to force every aspect of our lives into rigid, hyper-efficient schedules. Efficiency is a fragile thing. If we want our lives and our societies to endure, we must deliberately make space for resilience. We must protect our emergency reserves, our downtime, and our redundant safety nets. We must allow the people around us the freedom to self-organize, to experiment, and to invent completely new ways of existing. We must respect the beautiful, nested hierarchies of our world, trusting that when we empower the people at the local level to solve their own problems, the entire structure grows stronger. Living in a world of systems is not about achieving a state of perfect static peace. It is about embracing a reality that is constantly shifting, growing, decaying, and renewing itself. It is a world that will always challenge you, always surprise you, and always demand your deepest attention. You now have the eyes to see the invisible architecture of your reality. You understand the fires and the drafts, the explosive reinforcing loops, the balancing limits, and the delayed consequences of your actions. You know how to spot the traps before they close around you, and you know where to find the quiet, powerful levers that can change the course of your life. The music is playing, the forces of the universe are moving all around you. You no longer need to stand on the sidelines, frustrated and confused. It is time to step forward, find your footing, and join the dance.